It's now working.
I'm shutting the phone. Right. Welcome, everybody. I'm terribly sorry about the hitches that we had, technology hitches. We have a very eminent panel with us, distinguished panel, each one of them. And our topic, as you all know, as we all announced earlier, is the current overtures of peace between India and Pakistan, definitely initiated by Pakistan. The panel, I will introduce everybody one by one, but to sort of set the tone, I would say there are no hawks here, all are patriots. We are here not to do you versus I, but to try and understand how this process started, what drives it, and where it might go in the near future. The first guest I would like to introduce is Vinod Sharma ji. He's political editor at Hindustan Times, and he served in Pakistan as Hindustan Times resident representative from 1991 to 94. He led a delegation of 32 Indian journalists to the Pakistani side of Kashmir in 2004, and this was after a similar visit to the Indian side of Kashmir by Pakistani journalists under the aegis of SAFMA, the South Asia Free Media Association. And he has, of course, 30 years of experience in all media sort of platforms like the Wire Service, Current Affairs Magazine, daily newspapers, radio, television, what have you. So that's 30 years of experience there. And then we have Dr. Parvez Hudboy, another sort of a very distinguished guest. He's a professor, having taught at top universities and colleges in Pakistan. He's a nuclear physicist, but he's also an activist and a regular columnist and a very strong political commentator. And that's why we have him here. He serves on the Zohra and ZZ Ahmed Foundation. So I'm keeping these introductions short because between all of you, the experience and the experiences and the awards and is so much that we might finish the program if we keep going on and on. After Dr. Parvez Hudboy, we have the honor of having Praveen Swamiji with us, a New Delhi-based journalist and author. And he writes on regional security and intelligence issues. So that's going to be extremely useful for us. And he was described by the BBC as one of India's foremost commentators on Islamist terrorism, which has been the Kashmir issue and that have been at the bottom of the problem between India-Pakistan relations. So welcome, Praveen ji as well. And right now he's group consulting editor at Network 18. I cannot go through all the awards he's won, and he's written a number of books. And we'll come to Faratullah Bahar Sahib. He's also an ex-journalist. He was editor of the Frontier Post. And then, of course, his political career is fairly star-studded. He's a staunch Democrat and a humanist and a human rights activist in his own right. And he's, of course, a senator, a former senator, belongs to the Pakistan People's Party, and very grateful to him as well for joining us today. Now, I will start with a very strong introduction because I think all our guests here are fairly current on all the issues, and so is probably the public. We'll start with, there were speeches in a security seminar by Prime Minister Imran Khan and General Bajwa of Pakistan. And then there was a letter from PM Modi on Pakistan Day, which specifically sort of responded to those speeches, and it kind of mentioned an environment of trust and an environment which is of trust and also free of terror to move peace talks further. And then, of course, we know that Imran Khan wrote a letter, and it mentioned Kashmir as a fundamental issue. Uh, and there we are. And then we have Praveen ji's explosive story that appeared in uh, CNN 18, which mentioned that this is nothing new. This has been going on since 2017. Is that right, or 18? And yes, I couldn't hear you, Praveen ji.
2018.
2018. And then it got disrupted because of the attack in Pulwama and the attack in then as a retaliation in Balakot. So we have all of that um, as a context. Babar Sahib, I will bring my first question to you to kick off this discussion. My first question to you, as a Pakistani analyst, when you read General Bajwa's speech, who do you think was the audience, and what do you think is driving this initiative from Pakistan?
Thank you very much, Gul. I think that when General Bajwa addressed the security seminar, the audience was also the international community. The audience was India, and the audience also was Pakistan, because for the first time, when the general was speaking, and he spoke about burying the past and moving on. This was different from what the Prime Minister had stated in the same seminar, and when he said that Kashmir was the lone irritant. So there was this difference between the two. I think the audience intended was, of course, the international community, India, and of course in Pakistan also. But as you said, as to what drove, this is an important thing, as to what drove General Bajwa and Imran Khan to say this. I would say that these kind of things have happened in the past also. But this time it is significant in the sense that, number one, for the first time, the army chief also said that forget the past and move on. And it is significant also because the prime minister, who had publicly stated that he will not talk with India, no negotiations with India until the situation in the Kashmir is reversed to pre-August 2019. So the prime minister also went back on what he had said, and the army chief also said, that let us move on. Now, if one thinks about as to what are the real driving forces, I can say, let us say about Pakistan, I would say that I think that there is a realization that the firing across the LOC and the hot borders is becoming increasingly too costly. And after the NFC award, it is no longer possible for the security establishment to dip their hand into the national kitty and draw as much as they want. So I think the economic situation in Pakistan and the rising cost of the hot borders is one factor. The other factor, I think, also the economic condition of Pakistan and the sword of FATF hanging on Pakistan. I would say that recently it was not made public, but some friendly countries also advised Pakistan that to sort out its differences with India. And I think that China and Turkey also have emphasized upon Pakistan that differences with India should be sorted out. At least I remember that when Erdogan had visited Pakistan when he was the prime minister of his country, and he had invited journalists to Lahore over breakfast, and he said that he emphasized trade between India and Pakistan. And I think also that the imminent withdrawal of US troops of Afghanistan is likely to create a new security calculus in the region. So I think that because these seems to me to be the driving force as far as Pakistan is concerned. About what were the motives of the Indian Prime Minister, I would leave it to the Indian guests on this podium. Although generally it is said that India also would not want two hot borders India also may want to use this opportunity to tell the Kashmiris that, well, look, we are now talking with Pakistan, and you can no longer bank on the support of Pakistan, something like that. So I think basically there are motivating and driving forces on both sides. But having said that, Gul, I would also say that this is maybe significant, but it is deja vu. It has happened in the past also, and it did not yield any good results. So I think this time also around, it is, to me, it seems it is deja vu, but it is good to begin the talks and keep on talking. It is better to talk than not to talk.
Thank you so much, Babar Sahib. Yes, deja vu, and not because of having happened once. It has been tried various times by different military dictators and by civilian political leaders, and we know what came of that. So I will come to Vinodji. And Vinodji, I would like to ask you, what do you make of the shift from geopolitical, as put by General Bajwa, to the geoeconomics philosophy? What do you make of that?
Lot of it, but I also hope that something comes out of it. In fact, I read very closely the statement of General Bajwa. I think it was drafted not by any army general, but some diplomat with a considerable experience. Though there were contradictions in that statement. For instance, he said that let's bury the past and move on. But just a few minutes after that, he said that without addressing the issue of Kashmir, shall be elusive in the subcontinent. You see, I think the both people trying to size each other up. Mr. Imran Khan, when we did away with 370, as Mr. Babar pointed out, there was a statement from Pakistan that we don't care because we don't recognize it. And then they snapped all trade ties and downgraded our diplomatic relationship and said that we won't restore it until the status quo ante is reverted. But that hasn't happened. That is perhaps also the reason that after the DGMO's statement to restore what we had in 2003 and thereafter till 2007, also means that there was, you see, that there is some effort being made to restore tranquility on the border. Tranquility is a term we use with the Chinese, but is as relevant with the Pakistanis. But may I tell you one thing, that this relationship with Pakistan will come to some fruition when both sides are sincere about taking it forward. Right now, they are saying, the Prime Minister of Pakistan is saying that India should create an enabling environment, because by his own reckoning, he's already made a concession by agreeing to talk or by making overtures, because the original statement after 370's abrogation, so-called abrogation, was that we will not talk until status quo ante is reverted. But now, they have been talking about what should be done to create a conducive atmosphere. Conducive is the word which is being used today. Now, conducive also reminds me of the situation which was there in 1994, when Pakistan was telling us to create a propitious climate in Kashmir in order to continue the foreign secretary level talk. I think they're missing something out there, because conducive atmosphere has to be vis-a-vis what happens from across the border. And if 2003 is being restored, then the question is what followed the ceasefire announcement in 2003 after that visit of BJP, all party delegation from India, capturing the imagination of Pakistan, and then the memorandum of understanding happening in 2004, January 6, 2004, between Musharraf and Prime Minister Vajpayee. And what followed that? Is this government willing to repeat that. But the fact also is that what Musharraf achieved was rolled back by successive civilian governments. So I do not know really. Right now, I'm very confused. Peacenik. I was dead. I was dead since the past 3-4 days, 3-4 years. But now these movements have given me some voice to express some optimism. Yet I am tentative about the road that lies ahead. I'm not very sure, and I wonder whether the two principal interlocutors are actually sure that they really know what they want, or they are trying to size each other up, or that they are trying to, because India, may I tell you one thing, no peace between India and Pakistan can succeed without popular support. And right now, there is zero popular support for peace in India, for peace with Pakistan. And I think the situation in Pakistan is no different. Same very leaderships that actually created this situation on both sides of the border have to neutralize it. And it's not going to be an easy task, especially when they have to do popular politics. And when diplomacy, when foreign policy, especially India-Pak relationship, has become so intrinsically linked to domestic policy, be it India or be it Pakistan. And thanks to the media, I'm not talking about you, we are going to have a sober discussion. But the mainstream media that we have on either side thinks that, bashing each other is a sure shot road to high TRPs. We have to work on many fronts, not just the diplomatic front, but within, in order to take this caravan of peace forward if we are serious.
Thank you, Vinodji. You mentioned a couple of points which I'll put before the next speaker. You mentioned how these talks have been, again, by Imran Khan, sort of fixed with a resolution to Kashmir. Now, I'll go to to Praveenji next, and I'll ask him, do you hear them speaking different tongues? Because Bajwa is talking about burying the past and Imran Khan is talking about Kashmir. And the question
No, Bajwa is also talking the same breath about Kashmir. But he's warning, he's saying that without resolving Kashmir, peace shall be tenuous. It will be derailed, the process will be derailed.
Yes, of course, but I personally felt that his talk about Kashmir was more muted, and Imran Khan's was far more clear. And therefore, I will check with Praveenji whether they were talking different tongues and whether they were talking to different audiences. Would it seem to you that General Bajwa is talking to the international audience, and in the international audience, Babar Sahib spoke about India, and I would include the US in that and ask you that. Whereas Imran Khan is pandering to the gallery back home. The other thing, very important thing that Vinodji spoke about was the media. And we know that the media, at least in Pakistan and to a large extent in India, can shut up if told by, as you know, our mainstream is totally controlled by the junta. And similar is the case, unfortunately, in India. How far is that controllable and a factor? But the question I was also going to put to you is, how is the offer and process viewed in India? Is General Bajwa's overture seen as having, as Vinodji said, political buy-in from the people of Pakistan? We have seen past military dictators making overtures and even making progress, but they did not have, obviously, popular support. And how is it viewed in India by the people, by the stakeholders, and by the government, Modi ji himself?
So thank you, Golan. Those are all really interesting questions. I agree with you that there's been a difference in tone in what General Bajwa and Prime Minister Khan said, and to my mind, a quite significant departure in tone. And I don't think that should really surprise us. He's, after all, an elected politician. He's going to have to carry the political cost for this in one way or the other. Not General Bajwa, and I'm assuming any politician in that situation would want to leave a little squirm room to, sort of bail out should things get bad. That's not, to my mind, surprising. I think we probably should pay a little less attention to what politicians say in public or the generals say in public, and maybe try and consider a little more what they might be actually be saying to each other behind closed doors when the rest of us aren't listening. Now we know that various kinds of secret diplomacy have been a part of the India-Pakistan engagement. We didn't, for example, get to know about the Kashmir process between Tariq Aziz and Satinder Lamba until much of it was done. Earlier, even in the 80s, there were various levels of spy-to-spy negotiation brokered by the Jordanian royal family. And this is a good thing, right? These are two large military states, they're nuclear powers. They should be having a serious conversation, even when we don't think they're having a serious conversation. And of course, we don't know what's being said, but I suspect there are two elements to this conversation. And I think Babar Saab had it exactly right, if I look at this from the Indian side. So this contestation on the line of control is just hemorrhagingly expensive, not just to the Pakistan army, but to the Indian army, particularly since it's been confronting other tensions on the line of control. The army has also been facing constraints because Prime Minister Modi's public postures may be hawkish, his party may be extremely hawkish in its pronouncement, but he's run a series of low defense budgets measured as a percentage of GDP. So prior to, right after this China crisis, the last defense budget, you had this procession of retired generals coming out and saying, enough of this wussy, soft defense spending, we must get 3.5% of GDP. And of course, he didn't give them anything of the kind. I think these financial compulsions have tempered the space for action, whatever, again, the public and political postures might be. Now, that makes something like the line of control ceasefire relatively easy to arrive at because it makes sense for both sides. Yeah. And I don't think we should underestimate this. This is an important thing. Lots of lives are being saved. Just to, for your listeners, for way of an example, each of those shells lobbed across the line of control costs to the order of $100,000. And on an average night's shelling, each side will quite happily burn through 1,000 of them. Maybe killing a couple of soldiers and a few villagers. That is the degree of the expense involved in these things. On the political question, and both Binod Sharma Saab and Babar Saab, I think are spot on this. It's less clear what the way forward is. Part of this, of course, is because Hindu nationalism is ideologically important to this government. And conversations about Pakistan, quite often for many ordinary Indians, are not conversations about Pakistan at all. They're about a conversation by proxy about India's domestic Hindu-Muslim problems. Secondly, just having deinstitutionalized Kashmir's long-standing special status, I don't see this government going back on it. It makes no political sense.
That's very important. I mean, Praveenji is saying that if, because Imran Khan said, go back to that status, may give it independent state, autonomous status, and Praveenji does not see that happening. That is not going to happen.
And I'll just add to that, who knows? We don't know, as I said, what this conversation in the back channel or the secret diplomacy or the smoke-filled rooms or whatever it is. Maybe there are some smart ideas on the table that I cannot conceive of, but I don't see a happy middle ground here. Having said that, I think if one sat down objectively, one could think of very many ways to move this along while trying to keep this ceasefire in place. And I think Hoodboy Saab will bear me out. One of the sort of things that isn't talked about in either country. So I think we've all been to these track tours where we've had all these generals saying, hey, we have a lot of experience on how to contain crises and make sure they don't get out of hand. We know what we're doing. And I think after Pulwama, to any thinking strategist on either side, it became clear in more or less 48 hours that actually things got much more rapidly out of hand than anyone thought. Both sides were closer to the brink of a war than either side thought. And that maybe has had the happy effect of focusing some minds on how to avert crises like this. And hopefully there is a conversation. I'm very skeptical that the public in either country is prepared for the large concessions I think will inevitably be involved. But hopefully they can keep the conversation going. And as I said, I think just averting crisis is a very worthwhile aim for both countries for the moment.
Thank you, Praveenji. I would like to come back to this question of popular support in both the countries, because it has different dimensions in the two countries at this point in time. But first, let me take this to Dr. Hudboy. Dr. Saib, will you deconstruct for us? What does bury the past even mean? What does it mean? Does it mean forget about the Kashmir issue? Does it mean we want peace at any cost? What does it mean? Nawaz Sharif, whenever he was doing dialogues in the past with India, these were composite dialogues. Now, this forget or bury the past is signaling something which I'm not fully able to grasp. And what do you think will come of this initiative where each previous one came to naught eventually? And keeping in view and keeping in mind that this is a hybrid regime, once again, which is more of a martial law plus that exists in Pakistan. What will it eventually achieve? Will it be undermined the way the previous attempts were? If you could sort of weigh in on this, Dr. Sahib.
Well, that's a great question. What do they actually mean by forgetting the past? Because if we look back at 2017, this was the time of Dawn leaks. And Nawaz Sharif was the villain of the piece. How dare he say that we control, that we clamp down on jihadist extra-state actors going across.
Yeah.
How dare he say that Kashmir is not a popular subject to be talked about by Pakistani diplomats overseas. We can change all this. It's just that Nawaz Sharif isn't doing the right thing. But now they're doing exactly the same thing. And so in that sense, they are not proposing anything new. And so I agree with Farhatullah Babar Sahab that you can't read too much into these overtures that we're seeing today. Well, look, some things objectively have changed, and they've changed as a result not of India's military actions across the LOC. It doesn't come because of shelling. It doesn't come about for any military reason. It comes about for economic reasons. And it's the FATF, which has been so phenomenally important in getting Pakistan to act differently. Now, Hafiz Saeed, for heavens, that nobody would say anything about him. He would be there all over the place. He'd be there at wedding parties. He'd be running his courts across Pakistan. And then one day we find out that he's booked for terror financing and he's in house arrest. Now, heavens, why? It's because FATF is now really showing its teeth. And so as we look at these warming ups, I should say the softening of a very hard tone, it's to me because in June Pakistan is going to be coming up again, trying to get off the gray list and certainly trying to avoid the blacklist, but also objectively now it's no longer possible for Pakistan to do what it had been doing earlier. Now, in terms of the rhetoric, it had been scaled up to too high a pitch. So if
everything that you said so far, are you saying this is a tactical move by General Bajwa and not a strategic shift because of FATF, etc.? Is it just tactical? Is it temporary?
Oh, it's purely temporary. It is purely tactical. It is not, there is nothing far reaching in this. Neither India nor Pakistan are willing to concede any change in their fundamental positions on Kashmir. That's not going to happen, I think, as far as I can see. What did happen was in 2006, 2007, when with the Dixit plan and with Musharraf being enthusiastic about it, wanting a softening of borders, recognizing the fact that these now are two nuclear armed states with the capacity to completely eliminate each other or eliminate civilized life in each other. And that, look, you can only go so far in being nasty to each other. Now, the problem was that with the annexation of Kashmir and the loss of its autonomy, Pakistan could not afford to just sit back and do nothing. So it had to react. But the problem is that it reacted far too much. So it reacted to an extent where it became ludicrous. Government servants were supposed to get out at 12 o'clock every Friday and observe 5 minutes of silence. This was supposed to happen in schools. Everybody was supposed to participate in a national protest week after week. But it just happened for 1 week. So they did some small
I
things.
don't even know of anybody who went out and stood in the sun at 12 noon.
It did happen. It happened one single time.
Friday,
and then you cannot carry that level of rhetoric indefinitely. Now, just outside my window, there is a Kashmir Highway, which has been renamed as Srinagar Highway. Look, that was, I know you're laughing, I'm laughing too. But did that liberate Kashmir? No, it didn't. So look, you can't indefinitely ratchet up the tensions. And so I'm very happy that General Bajwa and Imran Khan, and I wouldn't separate the two from each other. After all, Imran Khan doesn't have an independent political mind. He does what he is told. He's a good boy. And yeah, so I'm happy about this. Yet I don't see this going too far. I don't think that we can read too much into this. Now, where there would be genuine effect, if you could say that the changes are genuine, when they'll allow people to go from one side to the other, when they start giving visas, that's when I say that keeping Kashmir what it is, allowing this to happen is what is going to make a difference. Because what Vinodji said, look, you have two hostile publics, and unless you cool that down, now how do you cool it down? You let people cross over the borders, and that brings a beautiful cooling effect to it all. And so if these people, I'm not talking just of the Pakistani side, I'm talking also of the Indian side. The Indian side has become very hard to get a visa to go to Pakistan. It's harder than for Pakistanis to go to India. So we've got to have people-to-people exchange. That'll be the signal of a true change in attitude, in tone.
Thank you, Dr. Sahib. I will bring this directly to Babar Sahib. This people-to-people exchange and visas. Let me connect this with a couple of questions for you, just exactly what Dr. Sahib said. Hussain Haqqani Sahib, His Excellency Hussain Haqqani, former ambassador to the US, recently wrote a piece in which he said that General Bajwa will need international support. He's looking at international support for this initiative, and also at domestic support. Now, where domestic support is concerned, Babar Sahib, I will put this to you. He has a puppet set up in place. But the real domestic support would be the people of Pakistan as represented by the various, political parties, which are almost all of them in opposition right now. Are they going to hand him that support at this point in time where they have felt cheated, where they have felt wronged, where they have felt that the economy and the polity and the democratic project has been hurt so tremendously by what happened in 2018, and it was, it is very out in the open now that the military meddled, and this is why the opposition political parties are almost on the roads or planning to be on the roads pretty soon. So is he going to get that support? And the other thing is, when very, very interesting thing that Dr. Sahib said, Dr. Hudboy, the real change will be indicated when there are visas and people-to-people contact. But for that, we need trust in our own people. The minute somebody from Pakistan talks to somebody from India, leave alone go there, they're labeled as a gadar, right? For us, for all these years, to talk peace has been treason. But whenever the generals step in, they take over the peace project, but still view us with tremendous suspicion. And the last point I'd like you to address is that with the situation of human rights in Pakistan, do you think, with the public and the opposition political parties, having dug in their heels, not accepting the legitimacy of this regime which is in place, do you think all of this can go forward?
Yes, good questions. Gul, first about Haqqani's observation that General Bajwa is not only looking for international support, but also domestic support. I would say that most of the political parties of the left and the center, they really want normalization of relations with India, barring, of course, the political parties and the extreme right or the religious parties, but overwhelming majority of parties, whether they are in Balochistan, whether they are Sindh, or whether they are the federal parties, they would like to bury the hatchet and would welcome the initiative. However, the question is, and really in all this discussion, the question will always be whether the toning down of the rhetoric, whether by General Bajwa or by Imran, a toning down of the rhetoric by a few decibels, of course, we all welcome, because for whatever agreements that the two countries will arrive at, the first step will have to be toning down the rhetoric by a few decibels, which seems to be happening. But in my view, there is no strategic shift. This is not indication of the strategic shift. And why I say this, and when you ask as to whether the domestic support, yes, the domestic political support by and large would be available, but at present, I don't see a strategic shift, because I think for two reasons. Number one, the Pakistan's military's mindset, in my view, I'm not a military person, but I think that the ascendancy of the military in Pakistan's domestic politics is directly related to peace with India. If there is total peace with India, probably the rationale for keeping a huge army decreases, and the rationale for huge expenditures also will be questioned. Therefore, I think that no matter what is being said, there is a thinking that, Pak-India relations also have a bearing on the military in Pakistan, because the military in Pakistan is strengthened in an environment of fear, in an environment of war. The second thing is why I say that in my view, I may be wrong, the military's mindset will, is very difficult to say that there'll be a strategic shift, because take the history of all the wars between India and Pakistan. 1965 war, which according to Air Marshal Asghar Khan, initiated by Pakistan, did not achieve the objectives. 1971, a horrible experience for Pakistan. The Kargil misadventure also was frustrating. So I think that because of this history of Pakistan-India military confrontation has created a kind of opinion within the army, which will preclude, the normalization of relations. So this is my take on the first thing about Hussain Haqqani saying this. And I think the strategic shift, as Parvez Hoodbhai pointed out, of course, people-to-people contact, the test, in my view, of the geo-strategic changing into geoeconomics is the trade between India and Pakistan. And if you look at the history, there was trade between the two countries until 1965 war. After 1965 war, it changed everything. And then gradually, of course, in 1995, India gave MF most favored nation status to Pakistan. We could not reciprocate. But in 2012, when we had the negative list, and the idea was that the negative list will be gradually brought down to zero, and negotiations were going on, and a cabinet meeting was supposed to be in December of 2012 to finalize that. It did not happen. And then in the days of Nawaz Sharif also, when it was announced that in March 2014, the cabinet was all set to decide on that, the cabinet meeting was postponed. And Mr. Nawaz Sharif is on record to have said that there was no consensus. Now, who were those forces and those elements? I can't say, because Nawaz Sharif also didn't say who were the people who did not agree to the consensus. But I think if some investigations are made as to whenever there had been moved towards trade between the two countries, at what level and why it was scuttled. So I think if we go and talk about geoeconomics, the first thing will have to be trade. The third thing that I want to say is really, and that is that the political elite and the political parties, major political parties, are also vary on the basis of the past experience. For example, Prime Minister Vajpayee visits Lahore. He makes a very historic remarks on the visitor's book. Nawaz Sharif invites him, and then Kargil happens. And all the initiative that Mr. Vajpayee had taken comes to a naught. Then comes Asif Zardari, the president. And in November 2008, he has a satellite interview with Karan Thapar, and in that he makes a very far-reaching initiative is announced, and he says, no first use of nuclear weapons, and we offer talks to India. And Gul, 3 days after that,
Yes.
Mumbai happened.
Yes.
And the entire initiative, not only that initiative, but the relations between the two countries plunged. And it took more than a decade. And then take also Mr. Modi coming to Raiwind and me calling on Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif. It was, I think, 24th of 20 or 25th of December. And on the 2nd of January, within a week, Pathankot happens. So you see, I mean, these are very serious questions. Who does that? Why they do it? These militants, as the Parvez Hoodbhai pointed out about Hafiz Saeed, not only Hafiz Saeed, which is a very valid example, but when Pathankot happened, and there were muted voices initially in India and later on open, that Maulana Masood Azhar is involved in that. Yeah. So we did not take any action against Maulana Masood Azhar, but surprisingly, and you would know that when the United Nations wanted to take action against Maulana Masood Azhar, we leaned on China to scuttle that initiative, not once, not twice, 3 times. So therefore, we have to keep all this in mind before saying that, whether the political parties, yes, of course, the political parties are on record. The 2 major political parties of Pakistan, both the PML and the PPP, have taken major initiatives. Both the initiatives were scuttled. This needs to be investigated. So I think that I have answered these 2. But the third thing that the human rights situation in Pakistan, and I think, well, the human rights situation in Pakistan is pretty grim. And the political parties, of course, they're raising their voices. But the human rights situation also, when I raise voice, and legitimately, and I should raise voice against human rights violations in the Indian Kashmir. And the 2 major things in the Indian Kashmir which are happening are enforced disappearances and the secret type of prisons. Yeah. But when the same thing is happening also in Pakistan, in our tribal areas, when we also have the internment centers which are beyond the law, and we also have enforced disappearances. So I think that we also have to look inwardly. I must raise, and I do raise, voice against the human rights violations in Indian Kashmir, but at the same time, I also have to raise voice against human rights violations in Pakistan, of which I gave you the example. And if one really goes to the Kashmiri people, if I were a Kashmiri, and if you ask me, I would say, all right, I am under the Indian military occupation, all right, and there's a military is calling the shots over there. So I would say that, if I have to have a choice, I would go for independence rather than to be under another military. So this also should be kept in mind as to when we talk about this narrative in both the countries, that Kashmir is a toot ang or Kashmir is a jugular vein. I think this narrative needs to be revisited in both countries, and let both countries realize that Kashmir belongs to the Kashmiris. Thank you.
Thank you, Babir Sahib. Because right at the end you spoke about human rights, I will just say that human rights, as you rightly pointed out, violations are to be condemned everywhere. Not just in another's country, but in one's own country, because human rights, to me, is not an internal matter of any country. That is why they're called universal human rights. But Babir Sahib, Vinodji, I will come to you. Babir Sahib has spoken about hawks in the military and a mindset which exists in the military, which has, he has hinted that it has sabotaged various different, or rather previous attempts to move forward. I would add to the list that he recounted, I would add to that even Pulwama and the attack in Pulwama, for example. At that point, I did write a piece that to me, it did not seem like it was, because it's Jaish-e-Mohammed, we know who the handlers are. To me, it did not seem like it was sanctioned by the top of the military, and that it was literally General Bajwa's overtures, which began in 2018, sabotaged. And exactly after that Pulwama and Balakot fiasco, the peace process did come to a stop. But now, Babir Sahib also spoke of trade. So I'd like you to comment on that. And plus, because he's saying that this overture is mainly for trade. Is it too late? Or are we still in time? Because we know Iran came up with Chabahar, Afghanistan is building rail links to Central Asia. So is the trade through Pakistan going to be attractive to Mr. Modi at this point in time?
Yeah, I want to make 2-3 points first.
Yeah. Go ahead.
First of all,
why was it scuttled before? Yeah, go ahead.
No, nothing. Nothing substantial happened in the recent years, which was scuttled. It didn't come to fruition, simple as that. The only substantive peace effort which happened between India and Pakistan, and many people in Pakistan may not like it, was under Musharraf. First with Vajpayee, and later with Manmohan Singh. That was the only time, and it is there as part of a tome which Mr. Kasuri has penned, uh, you know, um, on this back-channel discussions and about that out-of-the-box thinking 4-point program. Let's get it. I do not agree with Mr. Faratullah Baba that Kashmiris will ask for the third option, the independence. Kashmir independent of India and Pakistan. I used to tell Amanullah Khan, and he was a friend of mine, he was the third option man. I said, who will give you independent Kashmir? आपको जो पानी का जखीरा है उसके नल का हैंडल कौन देगा? ना इंडिया देगा ना पाकिस्तान देगा. The most strategic and the most crucial resource, the emanation of which is Kashmir, is water, both for India and Pakistan. And on this score alone, the very thesis of people like Amanullah Khan, who used to talk about the third option, that, this is the best option because it will meet Kashmiri aspirations and it will protect the respective national pride of India and Pakistan. And let's have this one. But then this was a strategic impossibility for both the other two interlocutors. I mean, if we take the Kashmiris out. Secondly, you see, human rights is a serious issue. There is no doubt about it. And may I say one thing, that human rights, even within India, there is a very, very intense discussion on human rights because there is a vast section with a level of consciousness which believes that human rights are a universal issue. Human rights are not confined to one country. If a country is in violation of human rights, other people will question them. India questions Pakistan on violation of human rights. We question the whole of Europe and America is questioning the Chinese on the question of human rights. So let us not confuse that with India, Pakistan just now, because they are both equally, I think, culpable insofar as human rights are concerned.
Yeah, everybody needs to look into their own.
About strategic and about tactical. In my limited experience of Pakistan and India, and that goes back to the 90s, I have never seen an initiative from either side transcending the tactical and becoming strategic, except for when this back channel was happening under Musharraf, and they were very close to come to an agreement. But then Musharraf messed it up in Pakistan when he ran afoul with the judiciary and the lawyers and other things, and the whole thing fell apart. And then at that time, Mr. Imran Khan, I had happened to meet him in Lahore at his residence, and he was an opposition leader at the time. And he made it very clear. He says, you are negotiating with a dictator, and we are not going to accept whatever understanding which is reached by him. He is not a popularly elected leader. Similarly, when Mr. Nawaz Sharif made efforts, Mr. Nawaz Sharif, unfortunately, like the PPP, which was never trusted by the Fauj, Mr. Nawaz Sharif was also not trusted by the Fauj because he was very upfront with them. And when Mr. Sham Sharan made a policy speech in India as Foreign Secretary, saying that India's growing economy should not be seen as a threat by its neighbors, but as an opportunity. Soon after that, I happened to be visiting Pakistan and asked Mia Saab, and I said, do you agree with this? And he says, 100%. He says, if I have good relations with Pakistan, with India, if I have good relations with India, I can attract foreign capital in my country for manufacturing by flaunting the big, huge Indian market next door. Now, here was a pragmatic man talking. This very person all that he did was negated. As Mr. Faratullah Baba just now said, that Lahore Accord was negated by Mr. Musharraf. Thank you what he did in Kargil. And what Mr. Zardari said, he said Zardari was doing a satellite into Karan Thapar. May I correct him that I and Karan together set it up for the Hindustan Times Leadership Summit to recall his memory, and I was in touch with him. Both Karan and I were in touch with him at that time. So when he said that no one first use nuclear doctrine, when he floated that big idea, as president of Pakistan, we had Mumbai, and Mr. Zardari was told as by some friends that this is your Kargil. Mumbai was presented to Mr. Zardari as his Kargil. So the problem is that today I am really wondering that amid the very many security ayatollahs that you have earlier and we have acquired lately, whether any peace effort, even if it is serious and beyond tactical, will come to a logical conclusion and be taken to a logical conclusion.
That's the question.
So many of the security ayatollah in my country and Mr. Bassett's book, former Pakistan High Commissioner to India, his book, I was reading his book. He goes out guns booming after then Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif saying that he was too keen to please the Indians, even on the Kashmir question, because when he came for the inauguration of Mr. Modi, he did not meet Hurriyat leaders. So I think that there is too much of investment in hostility, political investment in hostility, that it has become hugely perilous for any politician to wage peace in your country or in my country. Waging peace is more dangerous than waging war in your country and my country. That is the political reality. What is happening behind the scenes, if some guy with a magic wand is coming and is going to transform the world, transform mindsets on our side and your side, and draw us out of this crisis, of this perennial hostility that we are caught in, I really don't know. I would need a crystal ball to tell you that. But as of now, I am not very hopeful, but I wish that I'm wrong.
All right. Thank you, Vinodji. I will go straight to Dr. Hoodboy and put to you, Dr. Saheb, that Vinodji has suggested, it seems to me at least, that Musharraf's plan was great, but the politicians undid it. And when the politicians do something, the military undoes it. However, the conundrum that we have within Pakistan, so if you can first deconstruct that are the politicians actually driving the spoke into the wheel, or is it the other way around? Because Vinodji suggested that.
Well, can I say one thing? Sorry, 1 minute. I asked Pranab Mukherjee once, he was External Affairs Minister, also our president. I asked him about the import of the CBMs and what was being done in that period of time. And he said that, look, the only way Kashmir can be resolved to the acceptance of people in India and Pakistan is to give the people of Kashmir a way of life they like. And we can do it only through the CBMs, which meant that you keep what you have, we keep what we have. That alone is the solution, and not that you give us what you have or take away from us what you have. The only solution for Kashmir is to keep what each other has make the borders.
The CBMs are confidence building measures for
Dr. Saib. So the first question to you was with regard to what Vinodji suggested, and the second very important one is that what was suggested by Babar Saheb, Vinod Saheb vehemently disagreed with him that there can be no third option. Kashmiris will never vote for independence. Would you agree with me?
No.
That's a bit of an assumption.
I didn't say that.
You didn't say that. Okay.
I said that Kashmir will not get independence because India and Pakistan will not agree to have them monopolize the source of fountainhead of water. Water is the key issue when it comes to Kashmir and its independence from India and Pakistan. Neither of these two countries will agree.
Okay, so Dr.
So an independent Kashmir is really a pipe dream, and I will agree with Vinod ji on that. It would be nice, of course, except for the fact that it would not be financially it could not be financially independent. It would be totally dependent either on India or Pakistan. And so it is not a serious option. Now let's start from the from a from an incontestable truth, which is that nuclear weapons are a reality and they have frozen the borders for all times to come. The line of control is something that cannot be changed militarily either by India or Pakistan, try as they will. And so, to me, Musharraf's plan is just about the only one which makes sense, which means that you have soft borders, you allow trade across the borders, you allow people's exchange, you allow divided families to reunite, you stop the oppression of peoples on both sides of the border, and you work towards a kind of normalcy. And that's possible. Why is that not possible? Now, look, the reason Musharraf failed is it's important for us to understand why he failed. Because he acted independently. He didn't take people along with him.
Yeah.
When he was in in the corps commander
Isn't
meetings.
that exactly what is happening right now? Also, Dr. Hudbhoy, who has General Bajwa taken along at this point in time? Everybody's
Do we know? We don't. We didn't know at Musharraf's time either. But you could gauge the resistance to that because, look, when Musharraf went back on the plebiscite option, it was something that was suppressed by Pakistan television. They did not broadcast his very important, it was actually a stunning statement that we can do without plebiscite. And so, look, it's obvious he didn't take people along, but he was a dictator with I'd say, no visible opposition, substantial opposition, until he dismissed the Chief Justice, until he mishandled the Lal Masjid issue. So now forget about why he failed. Let's look to the future. The future I see is exactly in that plan. And we who desire peace and who want trade between India and Pakistan and who want people to people exchange and who want the toning down of all this rhetoric have to do that. I don't see any
Dr. We're looking at the past just to be able to predict the future, because obviously, as you have indicated, till we understand why we failed so many times and why specifically Musharraf failed, that will be an indicator of what happens next. If go on, please.
Yeah. So, what was the other point that you wanted me to address?
I think I've written it somewhere where I can't access it anymore, but I'll come back to you. Mm-hmm. But I'll come back to you.
The point is that we have borders which are frozen. And now let's. I want to come back to this again. Why is it that there has been a softening of the rhetoric? And I think a good deal of this has to do with geopolitics. After all, there's been an election in the United States. There's been a change of guard over there. The United States is fixated upon China. It doesn't want things to be happening between India and Pakistan. The Chinese don't want it to be happening either. The Chinese have managed to, in some manner, repair their rift with India. It's the China-US confrontation now that is taking center stage in the world. And so there is no encouragement to Pakistan to pursue, to ratchet up the rhetoric even further. In fact, the pressure is to cool it down so that FATF can go through. And so I think, I don't know how long this is going to last. I don't know if it is going to last beyond June. But while it lasts, make hay while the sun shines. We're happy with it. So let's start taking initiatives that will move this thing. So
Let's thank God for small ones.
let's
Yeah,
plan on taking people from this side of the border to that side. Let's plan on getting some trade moving.
yeah. I will bring a last set of questions to Praveen ji, because I realize that we've gone actually over an hour here. Praveen ji, can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, this is with reference to what you wrote very recently. It was a very comprehensive article. Um, Quick fire questions. Is there recognition in Indian circles that it is once again dealing with a military junta with no mandate to make political decisions? Then you already spoke about Modi not being a hawk in some certain ways. But do you see, even if the junta does not have the mandate, do you still see this offer actually accompanied by de-escalation in the jihadi activity? You're of course an expert on that question. And yeah, these two, if you can talk about these two, do you actually see this accompanied, and whether even if there has been de-escalation, explain it to us a little bit, and have these organizations gone away?
Exactly. Look, by way of a caveat, I should add that I'm not quite as much of an enthusiast for that Manmohan Musharraf
Okay.
deal as many others. And here's why. The plan's fantastic. But quite honestly, I think anyone with any seriousness has known since the 1970s that the existing borders of Indian and Pakistani administered Jammu and Kashmir are not going to be militarily changed, and that independence is not really on the table. We can talk about it. It may be a good idea or a bad idea, but it's been off the table for a long time. To me, what is really interesting about this conceptually very elegant and fine proposal is neither of the principals could ever bring it to their own public, firstly. And secondly, that neither of them would have been able to push it past their own establishment. Manmohan Singh just didn't have the numbers in parliament. He never built up a public consensus. And Musharraf, of course, could never bring it before the military, could never sell it within the military, and could never bring a public opinion, coalesce public opinion around this. He just didn't have the legitimacy. And I think for those of us who wish peace in India and Pakistan, there's a lesson to be drawn there. I don't blame Asif Ali Zardari or Nawaz Sharif or Narendra Modi or Manmohan Singh for subsequently aiming lower. Because whatever resolution takes place is going to be painful, is going to be difficult, and to persuade a public to be willing to accept those make changes is not politically easy. I think we should accept that as a starting point and accept incremental step-by-step progress simply because it's so muddy. This is complicated by the fact on the Indian side, quite honestly, that there is no trust for the reasons that Babar Saab excellently outlined. Every peace initiative has shortly thereafter dissolved in a bomb blast. And Prime Minister Modi, after that extraordinary gesture of going off for the wedding in Raiwind and all the rest of it, is not particularly keen on looking bad again with another Pathankot. So he's going to step cautiously. Having said that, I think Udboy Saab is right. There's intense pressure on both countries. These are nuclear weapon states. Just in 2019, they almost got themselves into a far bigger crisis than they might have thought they were getting themselves into. And if they're being pushed and shoved, even for a tactical accommodation, I think that's a good thing. Next steps, yes, it would be great if visas open up. Every terrorist manages to, terrorist and spy manages to go wherever they like. This entire visa regime is intended to harass people like you and I and everyone in this panel who honestly fill out the forms. It doesn't serve any other purpose. I'd love to see greater trade, though I think we shouldn't overestimate it. A lot of that Chabahar stuff, for example, was based on the idea that there would presently be a huge market in Afghanistan and minerals to be extracted. I don't think anything of that kind is going to happen in a hurry. But I think as people who would like to see these two countries move towards peace, we should welcome these baby steps forward. Without some sort of genuine political effort, though, and democratic political effort, I don't see this leading very much further than a tactical compromise between the two militaries. I certainly don't think General Bajwa or any other general is going to be able to pull it off.
Okay, thank you very much. Dr. Sahib, Dr. Hudboy Sahib, one short question, short answer, and then I will wrap it up. We really have gone above the 65-minute mark. We kind of drifted off into Kashmir, right? And for more than half of the show, we've been talking about Kashmir. But what Bajwa was talking about, I don't think it was about Kashmir. He was talking about trade. I want to know what's going on with this trade business. One sentence or two sentences, or one or two sentences after that from Praveen ji, and we will wrap it up here. Basically, what I heard was bury the past, forget everything, forget Kashmir. I mean, I'm saying it bluntly. He did not say it that bluntly. Okay. But I want trade. I want your trucks passing through my country and going to Afghanistan and Iran. And in that business, I will make some money. I mean, the money has dried up. He kept talking about geoeconomy, and we unfortunately went off into something that's been discussed like 70 years. And Kashmir is round and round. Now he's only asking for trade, and he's asking to not be isolated anymore. Of course, you spoke yourself, Dr. Saib, about FATF. It is the isolation he is trying to end. And I believe that there is a understanding at a very high level in Pakistan that India has been instrumental in having Pakistan isolated. So that's, he needs breathing space. Desunta needs breathing space. Would you make a couple of sentence comment on that? Dr. Saib, Dr. Hudboy Saib?
Certainly, he didn't say that, but one wishes that he meant trade, because that's really the sort of softening that we need. We know that we cannot resolve Kashmir. We have, however, gone one step, which is that the jihadist establishment in Pakistan, even if it exists, is much weaker than 5 years, 10 years ago. And so that's hugely helpful. Okay, Pulwama happened, but we don't know whether it was a Kashmiri who actually did that, or whether it was Jaish-e-Mohammed from Pakistan which did that. What one sees is a visible reduction in jihadist activity in Pakistan, a clampdown upon their assets, and that's a very good thing. Now, the next step is to get trade across and people across. And if that is what General Bajwa means, then we should clap our hands.
I certainly thought so. Thank you, Dr. Saib. Praveen, last word from you, exactly the same question on trade.
I think a lot of this is going to depend on how durable this clamping down of jihadist activity actually proves to be. From the Indian security optic, we've seen this at various points in the past. It's then eased off for a variety of reasons. But I think definitely the building block has to be an economic relationship between the two countries. Transit trade is one part of it, but we do a lot of our current business trade through third countries, which nobody except various sort of shady businessmen in Dubai profit from, and our consumers pay a lot of money for. There's a lot of potential here to get things done. My concern, though, really is that this is going to be fragile and tentative till there is some political momentum and some political legitimacy to it. And I think we have to see some real political leadership for that. I know in Pakistan, with this sort of strange form of hybrid government, this is going to be extremely difficult to pull off. In India, meanwhile, we have a government that's kind of tied itself in various rhetorical knots of its own making, so a tough one. But yes, trade, a little bit of peace, security, this ceasefire, I think will be a very good foundation if the will is there with our leadership.
All right. Thank you so very much, all of you, Dr. Pervez Sahib, Faratullah Babar Sahib, Praveen ji, and Vinod ji, I am extremely grateful to all of you for your time, and hopefully we can also keep talking. So I will just sum up very quickly that my
Well,
panel.
thank you for bringing us together.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. And I'm glad that you could sort of come at that appointed time. So the consensus seems to be, with little differences here and there, consensus seems to be that Kashmir is not, the issue is not going to get resolved very easily. That, as Praveen ji said, a very fragile issue, and it will remain so unless there is political legitimacy on both sides. I think that sums it up very well. In the meantime, everybody here seems to be supporting the idea of trade, the idea of visas, the idea of people-to-people contact, because they see that as a way forward, and most importantly, the ceasefire. And I will end it here, and thank you once again, and thank you to all our viewers for staying with us for this long.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.